Top of the morning to you and a warm welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines: drone hits building in central Moscow. Russian air defense systems thwart attack. U.S. Energy Minister grants snaps in Kiev, announces $245 million for Ukraine nuclear fuel purchases. Plus, Russian President Vladimir Putin claims Russia's economy overtook Germany's, says there are signs of economic growth in Russia. That assertion by the Russian President Vladimir Putin will be confirmed or debated by all and sundry. In the meantime, thank you for joining us. Russia says its forces intercepted Ukrainian missiles while Ukraine claimed to have carried out strikes targeting Russian personnel and military weapon areas. The Russian Defense Ministry issued a battle report saying the Russian army struck Ukrainian personnel and military weapons in the directions of Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson. According to the report, 4 HIMARS missiles were intercepted, while 39 Ukrainian drones were shot down. Meanwhile, Ukraine said in a report that in the past 24 hours, 26 battles broke out on the front line. The Ukrainian Air Force carried out 9 strikes targeting Russian personnel and concentrated weapon areas. 2 strikes were also made towards Russian missile air defense systems, while Ukrainian missile and artillery forces also struck Russian military targets. The mayor of Moscow, Sergei Sobyanin, says a drone hit a building in central Moscow that was under construction. Russia Defense Ministry says air defenses also shot down 2 drones in Mosaisk and Khimki districts of the Moscow region. However, there are no reports of casualties, and it's not clear who carried out the attack. Russian officials describe it as another attempt by the Kyiv regime to carry out a terrorist attack. Ukraine does not usually comment on who is behind attacks inside Russian territory. All flights were suspended to and from Moscow's airports early today, but were later turned back to operating normally. The flight suspension measures have been taken repeatedly in recent days. Ukrainian officials say 6 people have been injured after Russian forces dropped guided bombs on a kindergarten and residential buildings in Ukraine's southern Kherson city. Head of the Kherson Region Military Administration, Alexander Prokudin, says the attack caused a fire, which was quickly extinguished by firefighters. Kherson, a city of some 300,000 people before Russia's invasion, was captured by Russian forces in March last year. The frontline city was liberated by Ukrainian forces about 8 months later and since has come under repeated Russian attacks. Meanwhile, Serbian President Alexander Vučić says that Belgrade respects Ukraine's territorial integrity after meeting with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky in Athens, Greece. In a post on social media, the Serbian president said he'd had a good and open conversation with President Zelensky on the fringe of a Balkan summit, and they've spoken about issues including the territorial integrity of both countries. Serbia has repeatedly condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine at the United Nations and other international fora, but has not imposed sanctions on Moscow. It also maintains trade and military cooperation with its traditional Slavic and Orthodox Christian ally while seeking to join the European Union. In April, leaked Pentagon documents showed Serbia had agreed to supply arms and ammunition to Kyiv or send them to Ukraine. However, President Vučić said Serbia had never sold weapons or ammunition to Ukraine or Russia, although Serbian arms might have reached the battlefield via third-party countries. Ukraine have announced that its troops have entered the strategic southeastern village of Robotyne, a potentially significant advance in its counteroffensive against Russian forces. It's some 10 kilometers south of the front line town of Orikhiv in the Zaporizhzhia region on an important road towards a place called Tokmak. That's the Russian-occupied road and rail hub. Tokmak's capture will be a milestone by Ukrainian troops pressing southwards towards the Sea of Azov, a military push intended to split Russian occupying forces. In a video published by the Ukrainian military, local residents are seen in tears. A woman embraces a Ukrainian soldier, and several evacuated residents talk on the phone with their loved ones. Ukraine has had an arsenal of high-tech Western arms to fight Russia forces with, but is also deploying custom-built mini rocket launchers that use parts taken from a Soviet-era system. The Mini Grad uses pipes from Soviet-designed BM-21 Grad multiple rocket launchers developed in the 1960s and can be mounted on pickup trucks, providing additional mobility for the counter-offensive Kiev began in early June. Gal, a member of Ukraine's 108th Separate Territorial Defense Brigade, said the mini-grads were not as accurate as the advanced HIMARS rocket systems Kiev has received from the United States, but made it possible to get closer to enemy lines. Ukrainian military analyst Alexander Musiyenko said there were three advantages in using mini-grads. Their mobility enables them to move fast. Units have had them on target, firing without waiting to summon artillery from elsewhere, and they offer extra firepower for lightly armed infantry units. He adds that the deployment of such weaponry was designed to give an advantage to units which typically do not have this type of weapon. Now let's talk to security expert Mr. Onyekachi Adekoya, who joins us. Very good morning to you and welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me and good morning to your viewers. I'm actually in Abuja, not Lagos.
Great. I didn't say you were in Lagos, so I kept that in the area of circumspection. It's good to have you, though.
Thank you.
Right. So let's begin with the last report that we just shared. That's weaponry. And Ukraine has been on the receiving positively end of weapons from its allies. There's been no let up in their supply by these allies. Now, Brazil, sometime in the middle of this war, propounded an argument that supplies of weapons should be discouraged to Ukraine. But also that's a thorny issue because Russia has its own weapons. Does this continued supply of weapons just mean that Ukraine will continue to use these weapons in the way it has been doing and will not help towards the peace efforts, such as the Brazil President Lula da Silva was suggesting, that this continuous supply of weapons is what is causing this war to escalate? Is it possible, Mr. Adekoya, that if the West and if the allies of Ukraine say, let's slow down on the supply of these weapons and mediate with Russia to somehow, in some way, cease their attacks or limit their attacks, that this will help towards peace efforts?
Absolutely. I think you put it succinctly. Should the West cease the supply of weapons and munitions to Ukraine, of course, you know that Ukraine's armed forces have been significantly degraded. If you follow the reports coming from Ukraine, Ukraine has just launched its 82nd Airborne Brigade, which was a strategic reserve brigade to the front. And that means that Ukraine has now effectively used up its last bastion of reserve, which would bring Ukraine out of this fight if it loses this significant formation. So without a doubt, if the West were interested in peace, going back from 2014, it is my assessment that a peace could have been brokered. Maybe looking at the peace proposal put forward by Russia in December 2021, and of course, which the Americans responded to a negative, sometimes ending January 2022. So it's not my assessment that the West the collective West, led by the US, is seeking for a peace in Ukraine. Not now, at least, not until, by my own assessment, the November 2024 elections in the US takes place and is done with. Seeking peace with Russia now would seem like a strategic defeat to the current administration in US, and I don't see them seeking a peace at this time. So it's two things. One, yes, should they be interested in a peace, then we'll see some moves towards de-escalation. Because from the Munich conference since 2008 to the events of 2014, the peace proposals in 2019, 2021, the discussions in January 2022, up until this date, there's nothing to suggest that even the actors in Europe have a clear sense of how these events would end and what's the exit strategy for them. So for now, until, by my own assessment, the US elections of 2024, we may not be inching any closer to a peace. As you have seen, there's another escalation being promised, which is the promise of the F-16 fighter jets. That would only just escalate the events further. Now, don't forget that President Obama was very smart in his assessment in 2014 when the issues did occur to assess the fact that Russia retains the dominance of escalation. So you can see that Russia is quite fine to build up defenses and allow the Ukrainians impale themselves against those defenses while retaining significant escalatory force. So it's our assessment that Russia is open to a peace. They put forward a number of peace proposals. Even the Minsk Accord, if you look at the core spirit of the Minsk Accord, as of 2014, it was the recognition of the Donbass and the Luhansk People's Republic as a special status territory, yet under Ukraine. At no time did Russia push for an expansion or incursion into Ukraine. As a matter of fact, the Crimea debacle did not occur until after the coup, which was what we call the oust of Viktor Yanukovych in Ukraine. So, I mean, you can look at historical evidence and events that have occurred. The West does not give an impression that they're interested in a peace. So as long as they don't have an appetite for it, we'll continue to see the escalation from the Javelin to the Leopard tanks to the fighter jets, and who knows, we may just have the necessary conditions for a World War III to occur, hopefully, God forbid.
Indeed, God forbid. It's interesting in your submission just now, you brought up the American influence in the Ukraine offensive. Now that in America there is some criticism against the Biden administration concerning the funding of the Ukraine war because it runs under in amounts of funding their internal issues that they have in America. For instance, the Maui wildfires of Hawaii, where over a number of people have died, hundreds of people have died, 114 people, as a matter of fact, and maybe 850 people missing. Biden has been accused of not treating his own internal issues as seriously as he's treating the Ukraine crisis. Is there a danger that they'll be shooting themselves in the foot? Because although there is widespread bipartisan support for Ukraine, if they don't tread lightly with the support of the people of America, that the Americans on the street may begin to have second thoughts of the intentions of the Biden administration if they're sending more money to Ukraine than they're spending on their crisis, the fentanyl crisis, defund the police, the wildfires, the border crisis in the southern border of Mexico and Texas.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the most interesting thing about the American society is that once the wars are far removed from their local space, they're quite happy to allow the politicians get on with the business of statecraft. And so that's gone on for years until Americans begin to see body bags, they don't get jumped or spooked. by a military war occurring in some distant land. Yeah, so that possibility is there. You also, if you look at Moody's rating for the US economy, I think Fitch has also done a rating. A number of banks now in the US have had their ratings significantly downgraded, particularly the regional banks. Some have gone from stable to negative, showing you that the cost of this global destabilization that is spurred by the war in Ukraine. Remember that the world had come out from a major catastrophe, which is the COVID crisis, which caused a significant impairment of supply chain globally. And then you have another major conflict occurring, making a bad situation already worse. The German economy has lost steam. A number of countries are struggling in Europe with high cost of living. Inflation is quite high. Even the Fed has gone on a continuous rate hike. So this conflict is costing everyone something somewhere, particularly those in the West. And I don't know for how long the people can persevere, but if you look at the Ukraine crisis, President Zelensky came into power on the promise of making peace with Russia, and then they signed the Minsk Accord. But immediately after they signed the Minsk Accord, they went ahead and said it was a bad deal and continued on that narrative, all for political reasons. You can tie that to the American public. I assess that perhaps the Russia-Ukraine conflict may be a good distraction from the realities of the catastrophe of having a failed monetary system. The American financial system is projected to suffer a significant setback anytime from 2024 to 2025. And that will be where you get the hit, where the fiat currency system comes to its final limit of existence, particularly as you see the BRICS nation rising. So some analysts have assessed that some of this whole noise about Russia may also be a convenient distraction, just to shield the people and keep them preoccupied from the real dangers that are confronting the American society that is staring a de-dollarization crisis in the face. So whilst you look at the events on ground, some of the events on ground don't make sense. Particularly imagining that a NATO-supported Ukraine would win a Russia that is a superpower, that has a dominance of escalation, that is drilled in, has the supply and communications line secured, in any fight. Even America, some American analysts have assessed that America entering into the confrontation directly with Russia may lose, and may lose very badly, because in all the wars that the US has prosecuted, in Iraq, Afghanistan, even in Vietnam, it's not ended well. And that's for an enemy that doesn't have the kind of firepower that the Russians have. So the war and the conflict makes no sense. There may be some other socio-political, geopolitical explanation for it, but militarily speaking, it makes no sense, and you're very correct. I don't know for how long the Americans can hold on without beginning to raise their eyebrows at the current actions of their government, because like you said, it's over $126 billion to date, another 24 billion being proposed all through 2024, and it becomes worrying. It becomes worrying, like you said. So no one knows how long this can go for, but again, you're right to say the sentiments are beginning to rise in the US, and let's see if the pressure would impact on the actions of the government, but I doubt that.
The president of China, Xi Jinping, is absent from Beijing and present in Johannesburg. So are the leaders of India, the leaders of the other BRICS nations who are in South Africa as we speak. Is there going to be a new sheriff in town? globally speaking, business-wise, economy-wise? Is this de-dollarization of the global economy a practical thing that can really happen? What would you like to see as a result of this BRIC meeting in South Africa, to which Nigeria's vice president is representing President Bola Tinubu?
Well, I don't think it's a function of what I would like to see. I'm not a party to the ongoing BRICS configuration. But like you say, we're seeing a rise in the new in the geopolitical space. And I hope that we don't go from one unipolar world to another unipolar world. Quite rightly, if you say a new power is rising, and that power will be China. If you look at in terms of purchasing power parity, of course, China is the largest, biggest economy in the world. Even by purchasing power parity, you look at Russia. Russia has become the 5th largest economy in the world. BRICS has a number of countries. Their collective economy is even bigger as constituted than the G7 countries. So we've remember before 1991, we had a bipolar world. You were either for Russia, the USSR, or you were with liberal democracies. At the fall of the USSR, we entered into a unipolar world. And that unipolar world was characterized by liberal democracy, which is where we came into this thing of democratization of the whole world. But democracy, as it were, as espoused, has its own flaws and challenges, and societies have a right to decide how they want to see. The problem with the unipolar world has been of six, particularly with the removal of the gold standard, and then, of course, the dollar began to trade as the fiat currency, which goes against the Bretton Woods agreement, which says that the value of the dollar will be tied to 35 ounces of gold to a dollar, for the dollar to retain its place as a global reserve currency. But that has been completely derailed. The U.S. economy's debt is about 31.4 trillion. There's no reason why people should be trading using the US dollar, in my own estimation, because the fundamentals of the US dollar is flawed in itself. It's not backed by commodities, it's not backed by anything, it's backed by only military might, and that might is being challenged by Russia, by China, by North Korea, by Iran. And so we are coming into a multipolar world, and the questions are being asked. Why do we need to trade with Ghana using dollars? Why can't we have a more fair-based representative monetary system that works fairly for all? And I think that, again, like you said earlier, the Americans perhaps have shot themselves in the foot when they went ahead and militarized the dollar, robbing the dollar of its neutrality as a global means of exchange. And that spooked nations all over the world. The Chinese have been drawing down in their US Treasury holdings, Saudi Arabia, and most countries are doing the same thing. So I think we are now entering into a multipolar sphere of geopolitics. And I'm hoping that we don't go from one global dominance to another global dominance, but hopefully a fairer, more value-reflective monetary system that ensures fiscal responsibility and fiscal accountability, that avoids the recklessness of the fiat currency system. So if BRICS helps to achieve this, and it's good to see that Nigeria is playing its politics correctly by having the vice president represented there. So we should be in those kind of conversations. I remember in 2015, we had reached a direct currency swap with China. I import from China also, was hoping I could swap my Naira for the yuan. But let's see, if BRICS gets a currency that is backed by commodity, then of course we will be saying bye-bye to King Dollar in less than 10 years.
Your reservations concerning the global balance are much appreciated, and your insights all the other issues as well. Thank you so much, Mr. Adekoya, Mr. Onyekachi Adekoya, a security expert, who joined us from Abuja.
Thank you for having me.
After the break, Russia. Welcome to the sophomore stretch of today's coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. British Energy Minister Grant Shapps, during a visit to Kiev, announced that the UK government will guarantee a £192 million, that's about $245 million, export finance deal for Ukraine to buy nuclear fuel from producers, including British companies. It comes as Ukraine's energy system was severely damaged by a mass campaign of Russian airstrikes last winter, making it more reliant on its aging nuclear power stations, which supplied about half of the country's power before the war.
To Kyiv to confirm £192 million. This is a guarantee that we'll be providing. It's to help Ukraine ensure that their energy production, specifically actually their nuclear fuel, doesn't have to come via Russia in the future. This money will guarantee that it can come from much more secure sources.
Huge Russian flags took center stage at celebrations for Russia's National Flag Day on Tuesday, including in the city of Mariupol in Russian-controlled Ukraine and Sevastopol in Crimea, which Russia annexed from Ukraine in 2014. A patriotic rally was held on Sevastopol's Sapin Hill, where about 100 people unfurled a 48-meter-long tricolor. In the Ukrainian port city of Mariupol, which fell fully to Russian troops in May 2022, after Russia sent thousands of troops into the country, members of the Youth Guard organization also held a patriotic rally. Mariupol was severely damaged during a battle between Ukrainian and pro-Russian forces as part of Russia's special military operation, as it calls it. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has repeatedly stated that Kyiv aims to recapture all Ukrainian territory currently under Russian control, including Crimea. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin says volatility on financial markets had hampered companies' investment decisions and was something that needed to be brought under control. The ruble strengthened sharply last week after hitting a nearly 17-month low of 101 to, that is 0.75 to the dollar, as the central bank hiked its key rates by 350 basis points to 12%, and exporters increased selling of their foreign currency revenue following discussions with Russian authorities. He also claimed the Russian economy has overtaken Germany's, going on to say that it was important for Russia to maintain a high level of industrial output.
In recent months, the level of volatility has risen considerably on the financial markets. We all know it very well. It is clear that these fluctuations make investment decisions for business, companies, and citizens more difficult. The government and the Bank of Russia need to use the instruments at their disposal more actively. We have signs of economic growth in Russia. At the moment, its rate is pretty stable. In the second quarter of this year, gross domestic product rose by 4.9% compared to the same period last year.
Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now let's talk to Mr. Vince Onyekwelu, a national security risk strategist. He's also a former British police officer. He's joining us from the southeastern region of Nigeria, in Anambra State to be particular. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. It must be smart, that is, for the Ukrainians to see the Russians celebrate in their territory that was taken over by Russia last year. And it's one of the things that exacerbates the hostility between both countries, in spite of their closeness historically and even genetically. As far as that is concerned, maybe debatable by those who are closer to the issue. But at this point now that Russia is consolidating its positions in Ukraine, do you think that that's what's happening, that it has consolidated its territory, that the territory it's captured from Ukraine, and that Ukraine will have a hard time of recapturing all of the territory, even though they've taken back some parts of it?
Yeah, thank you. It's neither here nor there. Basically, every nation that is at war, that is successful enough to win some territories, they need to bring in what you call a post-territory capture operations. So a post-territory capture operations mean that you need to make the people that you capture their territory to believe that it's a done deal. You also have the task of trying to improve relationship with the people of that captured territory. Basically, if there were disruptions to their health centers, to their academic institutions, to their town halls, you need to actually be seen to be doing quick repairs. So there needs to be a relationship building between the Russians and the owners of those territories being captured. Right now, the Russians have a role to do to make the Ukrainian armed forces to understand that it's a done deal. The Russians have an extra job to do to make the citizens of the areas captured to believe that the Russians are a better partner compared to the Ukrainians. The Russians also have to make the NATO forces to realize that it's a done deal. So it's a triple responsibilities on the side of the Russians to show that they've captured these areas. Also, they have to think about the strategic importance of the areas captured. You don't just capture areas for the fun. You have to think about rail trackways, highways, close to resources. Example, Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. The Russians can never leave that kind of nuclear plant for NATO or for Ukrainians to capture it. Places like Crimea, they cannot, because Crimea is very pivotal to naval coordinations across the Black Sea. And obviously, now they are looking at the Odessa port. Obviously, Odessa port wasn't that strategic, but as time goes on, it might become strategic. But Crimea, Shore Banker, it's a done deal. Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, it's a done deal. And let's see other done deals also.
Without bias to the separatist people in Luhansk and Donbass, do you see Russia returning some of these territories to Ukraine as part of concessions to be made, excluding Crimea, or maybe even, well, obviously because Crimea is going to be a hard sell, back to Ukraine so as part of proposals to bring the war to a conclusion or to reach some sort of armistice? Do you think this is an armistice generating argument for Russia to withdraw from these occupied territories, excluding Crimea, and leaving everything back at the status quo the way it was before the war?
Yes, capital yes to your question. There's a possibility that some of the territories that Russians have captured of recent could be part of a deal peace treaty. Obviously, you cannot hold down everything. If you chew more than you can swallow, it may lead to constipation. So obviously, I believe some of those cities that the Russians captured so far could be used for deal in the future. So they need to capture those strategic cities like this Kupiansk. Kupiansk is very pivotal to issue of highways and obviously rail network. The same thing with Kherson. So there are cities that I believe that Russians will be very smart, because Russians are playing a smart game with the world right now. They, for the first time, made the US to have challenges with their war propaganda. Growing up, I've seen the US to be very fantastic with propaganda. Obviously, the UK also are very skillful in propaganda. Don't forget that U.S. made some of us to dislike somebody like Mugabe of Zimbabwe without even knowing who Mugabe is and what he stands for. They made us to hate people like Gaddafi of Libya without even knowing who he is and what he stands for. The same thing with Saddam Hussein of Iraq. But on this particular war, the US and NATO are struggling to make the world to see Putin as a bad person. Rather, Putin's propaganda has made Putin to be the new face of the multipolar world, the new face that will stop the abuse of African resources by European countries like France. So Russia has done a wonderful propaganda, released a wonderful propaganda machinery, and I think they should have some cities they will be happy to give back to the Ukrainians to show the world, you see, we are not a wicked people. We could have bombed Kyiv and used the same word NATO used to use back in the days, collateral damage. We can bomb Ukraine out just like they've done to Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya. But they chose not to bomb Kyiv out because of possible issues of collateral damage, which NATO has actually abused in the past in Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places.
Which the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, says is a thing now, be fueled by the anti-American sentiments that is happening around the world, or be partnering with the anti-American sentiments that has happened that you're alluding to. Our previous guest, Mr. Onyeka Chadekoya, reminded us of how the wars that the United States, or the military conflicts that they engaged in outside their borders and far from their borders, didn't end well. He mentioned Afghanistan, that was true. We saw the hasty withdrawal. He mentioned Vietnam, that was true. We saw what happened with Richard Nixon and the other presidents who were on board at the time. We saw what happened with other cases that you've mentioned. Now, the United States, do they have a responsibility to try to clean up that image, if it needs to be cleaned up at all, that they are not fighting another proxy war with yet another nation far from their borders for their own aims and their own objectives, that is not necessarily in tandem with global peace?
It will be very difficult for the United States of America to clean up their mess. Except for those that are not students of history. There are so much mess out there that most of us are not even aware. For example, all of us are aware of the Hiroshima atomic bomb. Most of us are aware of the Nagasaki atomic bomb in Japan, when the Americans, because of the attack on the Pearl Harbor by a so-called Japanese aircraft, which could be a Japanese aircraft, which can also be painted Japanese aircraft. And obviously the response of the USA was
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it was the Japanese that attacked Pearl Harbor. It's a historical fact, so it'll become a theory if you're suggesting that the United States were wrong in reacting to the attack on Pearl Harbor that caused them to get into World War II. It wasn't an attack.
Okay, let me accept without conceding. Don't forget that African proverb that says the story of the hunt will never change if the hunter keeps telling the stories about the hunted. All right, so let me accept without conceding. Now, the Nagasaki and Hiroshima atomic bomb, most of us don't even know where the materials and the resources that built what you call the little boy, that was the name of the Hiroshima bomb, and the fat man, that's the name of the Nagasaki bomb, the atomic bomb. So they call it little boy.
It was Oppenheimer and the group of scientists that came together. Oppenheimer, the American scientists that came together and created the bomb. So it came from the technology that the Americans had.
That's the point. The materials, the uranium that was used to build the little boy and the fat man came from Democratic Republic of Congo. It's a place called Shilolokwe. That particular uranium mine is still inaccessible today, because when the Americans left that mine, they had to use one of the best concrete cement to seal the entrance of that mine. But people in that area are still being infected by diseases because of the radiation from uranium. So there are so many other stories in the world. So I would suggest that the Americans don't need to think about what happened in the past, but they can think going to the future. How can we make the world more friendly? Not thinking about our own selfish US dollar benefit or crude oil. Are they going to go back to Libya to clean up what they did in Libya? It's unimaginable. Can they go back to Iraq to clean up the mess in Iraq? So there are so many countries you cannot even say, go back to Syria. So let's not look into the past. Yes, the past will be there to judge them, but going forward in the future, example, the issue of gay rights. Listen, Americans have a festival tradition called Halloween, the celebration of the dead. You have children wearing masks of evil-looking monsters, beasts. It's their culture and their tradition. But they now want to force African nations. They had issue with Jonathan Goodluck of Nigeria when he was a president, when our president refused the issue of gay rights in Nigeria. Barack Obama wasn't very nice to Jonathan Goodluck. He did not use very kind words because we chose not to follow gay rights. We chose not to have man and man marry each other. But America will force countries like Uganda pass sanctions against a sovereign nation for choosing not to follow gay rights. So the USA has to know that you celebrate your own culture. Don't force somebody else to celebrate a culture that is foreign to their integrity, to their culture, to their traditions, to their beliefs. So these are the things that we can use. And Russians and Chinese have been very smart about the issue of gay rights, saying we are not going to force any nation to respect LGBT or man marry man or woman marry woman, but it should be about your own culture and your own traditions. So those are the scales we need to monitor what the US have done, what they are currently doing, and the best way for them to go into the future.
Thank you. We'll leave it there, lest we digress, but it is, it can be codependent when nations have a certain ideology that is not supported by other nations, but boundaries have to remain and boundaries have to be respected, whether they may be geographical boundaries or cultural boundaries or even religious boundaries. Thank you so much, Mr. Vincent Onyekwelu, for your submissions this morning. National Security Risk Strategist, a former British police officer who joined us from Anambra State. Many thanks.
Thank you. Good morning once again.
Good morning. And when we return, Ukraine lines up Russian war trophy tanks in central Kyiv. Details in a moment. Please stay with us.
Lights, camera, action, and showtime.
This is a big win for my generation of Africans all over the world.
You don't need no other body.
I want you to listen to me well.
The movies in the beginning was I was the lover man.
Some amazing talent in Nigeria who were born, raised, they never left, they're there.
Shawty want a medium girl.
Watch entertainment news on Channels Television at these times.
In the world of diplomacy and international relations, unsaid conversations are just as important as what is said.
Donald Trump believes that as a president, he has all the powers.
How it's said.
International community will normally frown at any violation of human rights.
To whom it said.
There are people who have left their countries because the system has left them with no other option.
And the reactions.
We are going to face a massive ecological and humanitarian crisis.
In-depth analysis on the what, how, and why on Diplomatic Channel, weekdays at these times.
We are in the final stretch of today's special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. BRICS leaders are meeting to plot the future course of the bloc of developing nations, but divisions re-emerged ahead of a critical debate over a potential expansion of the group intended to boost its global clout. Heightened tensions in the wake of the Ukraine war and Beijing's growing rivalry with the United States have pushed China and Russia, whose president, Vladimir Putin, will attend the meeting virtually to seek to strengthen BRICS. The Russian president said in recorded remarks to a summit of the BRICS countries in South Africa that the grouping was on course to meet the aspirations of most of the world's population. Brazilian President Lula da Silva defended a common trading currency for the BRICS members as he reaffirmed his intention of rebuilding a relationship with the African continent. Mr. Lula also commended Africa's potential for growth and as a potential trading partner. Now let's talk to Channels Television South Africa Bureau Chief Betty Dibia, joining us from Johannesburg. Betty, good morning.
Good to see you. Yeah.
Likewise. So now they're all there. Everybody's present. That is the countries and the leaders who can be present, to the exclusion physically of Vladimir Putin. Could you catch us up to speed with the goings-on thus far?
All right. As of today, or at this point, the leaders are in and they're having their closed plenary, where they will be briefed by the chair of the National Security Advisors. So after that, they will have the family photo. That's the traditional thing. And then the open plenary, they will have engagement with the leadership or the president of the New Development Bank. That's Ms. Dilma Rousseff. You have the BRICS Business Council engagement with the leaders, as well as the BRICS Women's Business Alliance. At the end of that, they will be having a press conference, and then the Johannesburg Declaration. That's the final outcome for the BRICS only, ahead of tomorrow's BRICS Africa outreach, where you have the BRICS Plus dialogue session with the leaders. But at this point, we know that they're seized with the issue of expansion or not. Apparently, they're not all on the same page, where one of the leaders, like the Brazilian president, if you can still hear me, Olumide, the Brazilian president favors partnerships instead of expansion. The other leaders, like those of China and Russia and South Africa, have openly talked about expansion. But the Brazilian president is speaking to China, saying something like, if I have to support expansion here, you have to support our quest for a place at the United Nations Security Council, or support our quest for an expansion of the UN Security Council. So then the issue of Iran's joining, Iran has applied to join. Not everybody is on the same page with that as well, although Brazil favors the joining of a country from South America. So there's so many other things apart from the other dealings or the side agreements that are being reached between countries and entities from other countries, like South Africa signing an energy deal with 8 entities from China. You also have the Brazilian president favoring a common trade unit or trading unit instead of leaving local currencies. That is, retaining local currencies but have a common trading unit. So there's so many other smaller issues that they're talking about right now ahead of that Johannesburg Declaration of the BRICS, before they now bring in the other countries who are aspiring or who have shown interest.
It's interesting, you just mentioned, it'll be interesting, Iran joining BRICS, Betty. But finally, yesterday you mentioned that there were some protests by some groups. I do not recall whether it was specific to Russia's invasion of Ukraine or South Africa's diplomatic policy. These events usually have on the sidelines groups taking advantage of it to make their voices heard. Any such occurrences?
There are more that protest yesterday by Amnesty International South Africa had to do with the invasion of Ukraine, of course, and reaching out to African leaders. South Africa, first, against South Africa's stance, but reaching out to the leaders and the other African countries present to put pressure on Russia to silence the guns and end the war. Today, we have another protest and we expect more. This has to do with the ECOP. ECOP is the East African crude oil pipeline. So it's an environmental issue as well for some of the communities affected. The project is supported or funded by China, partly. And it's supposed to run from Uganda through some other countries to Tanzania. So this is an issue that has attracted a lot of protests from different entities, and they're protesting today as well, saying that China should stop the funding of that ECOP project. That's the East Africa Crude Oil Pipeline. And we expect more protests.
And we look forward to the outcome of the BRICS summit. Many thanks, Betty Dibia, Channels Television South Africa Bureau Chief, joined us from Johannesburg.
Thank you.
And we do also sincerely apologize for the glitch in part of the audio of Betty's broadcast there. And finally, on the program, Ukraine lined up on the burnt-out husks of Russian tanks and fighting vehicles along the capital Kiev Central as Ukrainians prepare to mark their second wartime Independence Day this week. The national holiday commemorates 32 years of post-Soviet independence from Moscow on Thursday, falls exactly 18 months after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of its southern neighbor. The Independence holiday comes at a critical juncture for Kyiv with its counteroffensive against Russia's occupying forces, making only slow progress in the country's east and south while removed from Kyiv. Residents in central Kyiv say they like the display of wrecked Russian hardware, which they hope will raise the fighting spirit of Ukrainians. But some saw it as a painful reminder of the horrors of war. And the horrors of war, once encountered, is not likely to be encountered again. We hope that this helps to bring the parties to the negotiating table in some way. And that's where we leave it on today's edition of Russian Invasion of Ukraine. Thanks for watching. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Have a good day.